When the system kicked me out at 18, it left my little sister with nowhere to go. But a rusty key and a forgotten map from our grandfather led us to a place no one knew existed. And what we found inside wasn't just survival, it was a second chance. If you've ever felt like the world had written you off, or if you've had to find your own way in the dark, then hit that subscribe button and stick with me. This story is for you. The clock on the wall of the group home office clicked over to 4:17 p.m. 17 minutes ago, I had officially become an adult. 17 minutes ago, I had officially become homeless. Mrs. Davison, the home supervisor whose smile never quite reached her eyes, slid a thick manila envelope across the particle board desk. It contained my birth certificate, my social security card, and a check for $127, the last of the funds held in trust for me by the state. "Happy birthday, Alex," she said, the words as sterile as the bleach-scented air. "And good luck." Luck. It felt like a cruel joke. I stuffed the envelope into the single duffel bag at my feet. It was an old Army surplus bag, dark green and frayed at the seams, containing everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, a toothbrush, and a photograph of my mom and dad from a time before their faces became pinched and their eyes grew distant. A time before everything fell apart. Outside the office door, I could hear my sister Maya talking quietly with one of the younger kids. Her voice was a low, soothing murmur. At 15, she was already better with people than I would ever be. She was also the reason my heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. In 2 hours, a different car would come for her. A car that would take her to a new placement, a higher security facility for teens with complex family histories, which was the system's gentle euphemism for kids like us, the ones nobody wanted. We'd been in the system for 2 years, ever since the bank took the house and our parents just disappeared. 2 years of being moved from one temporary home to another, the only constant being that we were together. Now, my 18th birthday had become a guillotine, severing that one last connection. I was an adult, free to fail on my own. She was still a ward of the state, a package to be shipped to the next available address. "Alex?" Maya was standing in the doorway. She was small for her age, with big, dark eyes that saw far too much. She clutched a worn sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "Is it time?" I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I shouldered the duffel bag, the weight of it feeling both pathetic and monumental. We walked down the long, echoing hallway, past the rooms of other kids who were watching us with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. This was their future, too, a birthday that felt like a funeral. As we reached the front door, Mrs. Davison called my name again. "One more thing. Your last foster mother, Mrs. Gable, dropped this off for you last week. Said it was from your grandfather, something he left for you a long time ago." She handed me a small shoebox-sized cardboard box, sealed with yellowed tape. It was surprisingly heavy. I didn't remember much about my grandfather. He'd passed away when I was 10. I had a vague memory of a kind man with hands that smelled like soil and pipe tobacco, a man who told rambling stories about the woods behind his house. I took the box, my fingers numb. It felt like an artifact from another life. Maya looked at it, her head tilted. "From Grandpa?" she whispered. I nodded again. We stood on the curb, the gray afternoon light making everything look washed out and tired. The city bus hissed to a stop a block away. That was my ride. My ride to a temporary overnight shelter, a place Ms. Albright, our well-meaning but overwhelmed social worker, had arranged. She'd promised to call me there tomorrow to discuss long-term options, but we both knew what that meant. A cot in a crowded room, a list of dead-end jobs, and the slow, grinding erosion of hope. Maya's transport, a nondescript sedan, was due any minute. 2 years of shared rooms, whispered secrets in the dark, and navigating the labyrinthine rules of foster care together. And it was all ending here, on a cracked sidewalk in front of a building that was never a home. I looked at her, at the brave face she was trying so hard to maintain, and a cold, hard knot of anger formed in my gut. Anger at my parents, at the system, at the whole indifferent world. This wasn't happening. I wouldn't let it. "Come on," I said, my voice rough. "You're coming with me." Her eyes widened. "But they said—" "I don't care what they said," I interrupted, grabbing her hand. Her fingers were cold. "We're not being separated. Get on the bus." For a second she hesitated. Then she squeezed my hand, a flicker of her old fire returning to her eyes. "Okay." It was the stupidest, most reckless decision of my life. And it was the only one that made any sense. We ran for the bus, my duffel bag banging against my back, the mysterious box from my grandfather tucked under my other arm. We were running from the only life we knew toward absolutely nothing. We were free, and we were terrified. The emergency shelter was exactly what you'd expect. The air was thick with the smell of despair, disinfectant, and boiled cabbage. It was a cacophony of noise, a television blaring in a corner, a baby crying endlessly, the low, guttural snores of men who had long ago given up. Maya stayed close to my side, her sketchbook held so tightly her knuckles were white. We were given 2 cots in a cavernous room, separated from the others by nothing more than a few feet of stained linoleum. I put my duffel bag between us, a flimsy fortress against the world. I knew running away with her was a crime, kidnapping technically. I was an adult, and she was a minor. If they found us, I'd be in a world of trouble, and she'd be sent somewhere far worse than her original placement. The thought made my stomach clench. "What are we going to do, Alex?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. I wished I had an answer. I wished I was the older brother she deserved, the one with a plan, with a future. But I was just a scared kid who had 17 minutes of adult experience. "I don't know yet," I admitted, my voice low. "But we'll figure it out, together." I was trying to convince myself as much as her. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ms. Albright. I let it go to voicemail, my hand shaking. I couldn't talk to her, not yet, not until I had something, anything other than this disaster. We sat on the edge of the cots, the unopened box from our grandfather sitting between us. It was a tangible piece of a past we barely remembered, a past before the chaos. It felt heavy with a meaning I couldn't yet grasp. "Should we open it?" Maya asked. I nodded, carefully slicing the brittle tape with my thumbnail. The cardboard was soft with age. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were 3 objects. The first was a small, tarnished silver locket. I opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of a young man and woman, their faces bright with optimism. Our grandparents. On the other side was a miniature, impossibly detailed engraving of a single oak tree. The second object was a key. It wasn't a normal key. It was heavy, made of brass, with an ornate circular head and a complex jagged bit. It looked like a key from a pirate movie, something that belonged to a treasure chest or a castle dungeon. It felt cold and solid in my palm, a piece of irrefutable reality, in our sea of uncertainty. The third and final object was a sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, folded into a small square. I carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. It was hand-drawn in black ink, the lines precise and confident. It showed a stretch of what looked like rural backwoods, with contour lines for hills, a winding creek, and various landmarks annotated with cryptic notes. Where the two streams weep, past the sleeping giant. Follow the sun's shadow at noon from the crooked pine. At the top, in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script, were 2 words: for Alex. In the bottom corner, there was a small red X. We stared at it, the sounds of the shelter fading into a dull roar. It made no sense. It was a fantasy, a child's game. But the key in my hand was real. The locket was real. My grandfather wasn't a fanciful man, not from what I remembered. He was quiet, practical, a man of the earth. "What is it?" Maya breathed. I think it's a place," I said slowly, tracing the lines with my finger. "A place he wanted me to find." An idea, insane and desperate, began to form in my mind. It was a spark in the overwhelming darkness. The alternative was staying here, waiting to be caught, waiting to be separated forever. This map, this key, it wasn't much. It was probably nothing, a forgotten game, a sentimental token. But it was the only thing we had. I took a deep breath, the foul air of the shelter filling my lungs. "Tomorrow," I said, looking at Maya, my decision solidifying. "We're going to find out what this X means." I took out the manila envelope from my bag, the check for $127. I had another 50 saved from odd jobs. It wasn't much, but it might be enough for a bus ticket. Using my phone, I looked up the name of the nearest town on the map, a tiny dot called Northwood, nestled in a range of mountains I'd only ever seen in pictures. There was a bus that went there. It left at 6 a.m. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a dead man's riddle. But it was a direction. It was a choice. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it was ours. We spent the night huddled together for warmth, not sleeping, just waiting for the first hint of dawn. The map spread out between us like a sacred text. The bus station at 5:30 in the morning is a special kind of purgatory. It's a place for people who are either starting a journey or ending one, and it was impossible to tell which was which. The air was stale with the ghosts of 1,000 departures. I bought 2 one-way tickets to Northwood, a transaction that drained almost all of our money. The man behind the plexiglass didn't even look at me. To him, we were just 2 more faces passing through. I bought 2 coffees and a pair of stale donuts from a vending machine, and that was breakfast. We sat on a hard plastic bench, Maya's head resting on my shoulder, her sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing, just holding the pencil, her gaze distant. "Are you scared?" I asked quietly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "A little," she admitted. "But I was more scared back there, of them taking me, of being alone." She looked up at me, and her expression was so full of trust, it was like a physical blow. "As long as we're together, it's okay." I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words felt like lies. I had no idea what we were going to find in Northwood, or if we'd find anything at all. I was leading her on a wild goose chase based on a piece of paper. The responsibility of her trust was a crushing weight. The bus arrived with a great sigh of its air brakes, an old, lumbering beast. We found 2 seats near the back. The vinyl cracked and cold. The city was still dark as we pulled out of the station, the streetlights smearing across the dirty window. I watched the familiar landscape of our failure recede. The pawn shops, the boarded-up storefronts, the endless rows of tired-looking apartment buildings. Good riddance. As dawn broke, the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to farmland. The world outside the window grew greener, wider. The tight knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen, just a fraction. We were moving. We were doing something. For the first time, it felt less like we were running away, and more like we were running toward something. Maya eventually fell asleep, her breathing soft and even. I stayed awake, the map spread across my lap. I studied every line, every cryptic phrase. The sleeping giant. What could that be? A rock formation? A specific old tree? It was a language I didn't understand, a code from a man I barely knew. I took the locket out of my pocket and looked at the picture of my grandparents. They looked so young, so hopeful. Had he known then what would become of his family? Had he seen the seeds of his son's destruction? Maybe this map wasn't just a location. Maybe it was an apology, or a warning. The journey took hours. The bus emptied and filled with different people at various small town stops. Farmers with weathered faces, teenagers heading to a bigger town for the day, a young mother with a restless child. No one paid us any mind. We were invisible, and for that, I was grateful. By early afternoon, the landscape had changed again. The flat farmland had given way to rolling hills, then to steep, forest-covered mountains. The road narrowed, twisting and turning through deep green valleys. This was a different world. It was wilder, older. The air itself seemed different when the bus briefly stopped in a tiny hamlet to let someone off. It smelled of pine and damp earth. It smelled like the memory of my grandfather's hands. Finally, the bus driver called out, "Northwood!" We were the only ones to get off. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a cloud of diesel fumes and a profound silence. The town of Northwood consisted of a single intersection. On one corner was a general store with a rusty tin roof and a gas pump out front. On another was a small post office. And that was it. The rest was just trees, endless, towering walls of green. We were in the middle of nowhere. A man in overalls was sweeping the wooden porch of the general store. He nodded at us as we approached. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low drawl. "You two lost?" "We're looking for a place," I said, my voice sounding thin in the vast quiet. I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. I showed him the map. "My grandfather drew this, a long time ago. We're trying to find it." He squinted at the paper, his brow furrowed. He pushed his hat back on his head. "That's old man Hemlock's work, I'd wager. Haven't seen that handwriting in 20 years. He owned a parcel of land up on the ridge, 10 acres. Nobody's been up there since he passed." He pointed a calloused finger down a narrow, unpaved road that disappeared into the trees. "That's the old access road. It's about a 5-mile walk. Be careful, though. It gets wild up there fast, and it'll be dark in a few hours." My heart leaped. It was real. The map was real. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with relief. He just grunted, returning to his sweeping. We had a direction. We had a destination. We bought 2 bottles of water and a bag of apples from the store, then started down the dirt road into the deep woods. The real journey was just beginning. The access road was less of a road and more of a suggestion. It was a pair of overgrown ruts snaking their way up the mountain, choked with weeds and littered with fallen branches. The air grew cooler under the dense canopy of pine and oak. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional cry of a distant bird. It was beautiful, but it was also intimidating. The forest felt ancient, indifferent. We were intruders here. Maya, who had always been a city kid, was quiet, her eyes wide as she took in the sheer scale of the trees towering over us. After an hour of steady uphill walking, we came to a fork in the road that wasn't on the map. Panic flared in my chest. Had we taken a wrong turn? I pulled out the map, my hands trembling slightly. "What does it say?" Maya asked, her voice tight with worry. I scanned the cryptic clues again. "Follow the sun's shadow at noon from the crooked pine." It was well past noon. That clue was useless. My eyes landed on another. "Where the two streams weep." I looked around. The road was dry, but I could hear a faint sound, almost imperceptible, the sound of running water. "This way," I said, pointing toward the sound. We left the road and pushed through thick underbrush. The ground became soft and marshy, and then we saw it. A small creek, splitting into two smaller rivulets that trickled down the hillside. "Where the two streams weep." My grandfather had been a poet. We followed the main creek upstream, as indicated by an arrow on the map. The terrain grew steeper, more rugged. We had to scramble over moss-covered rocks and duck under low-hanging branches. My duffel bag felt impossibly heavy. Maya was starting to lag, her face pale with exhaustion. "We can rest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she said, shaking her head, her jaw set with a stubbornness I recognized. "Let's keep going. We're close. I can feel it." The sun was beginning to dip below the ridge, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The temperature was dropping fast. A new, more urgent fear began to creep in. We couldn't be out here after dark. We had no tent, no fire, no real supplies. The friendly-looking woods were quickly transforming into something menacing. "Past the sleeping giant," I muttered, reading the next clue aloud. We scanned the landscape desperately, and then Maya saw it. "Alex, look!" She was pointing at a massive boulder 50 feet up the hill from us. It was as big as a small house, covered in a thick blanket of green moss, and it was shaped vaguely like a person lying on their side. The sleeping giant. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. We were on the right path. The final landmark was the crooked pine. From there, the map said to walk 50 paces due north. We found the tree easily enough, a gnarled old pine that had been struck by lightning years ago, its trunk twisted into a permanent, agonized spiral. I took out the cheap compass I'd bought at the general store. I lined it up. "North is this way," I said, pointing deeper into a dense thicket of ferns and young saplings. We counted out 50 paces together, our voices small in the twilight. We arrived in a small, unremarkable clearing. There was nothing there, just dirt, rocks, and a thick carpet of fallen pine needles. My heart sank. This was it, the end of the line, a fool's errand. All this way for nothing. We were lost, exhausted, and we were going to spend the night in the cold with no shelter. I had failed her. Maybe we miscounted?" Maya said, her voice wavering. I didn't answer. I just stood there, the full weight of my stupid, reckless hope crashing down on me. I kicked at the ground in frustration, a small, pathetic gesture of defiance. My foot hit something hard, not a rock. It made a dull, metallic thud. I dropped to my knees, frantically scraping away the dirt and pine needles with my bare hands. Maya knelt beside me, her earlier exhaustion forgotten. Along one wall were floor-to-ceiling metal shelves, neatly organized. I swept the light across them. They were packed with supplies. There were military-style MREs, huge plastic jugs of water, cardboard boxes of canned goods, beans, soup, vegetables. There were first aid kits, batteries, flashlights, warm-looking wool blankets, and tools. It was a survivalist's paradise. My grandfather hadn't just marked a spot on a map. He had prepared a refuge. On the opposite wall, there was a small hand-crank generator wired to a series of bare bulbs on the ceiling. I showed Maya how to turn the crank. She started turning it, slowly at first, then with more confidence. A single bulb flickered, then another, casting a stark, yellow light across the room. The space was stark and utilitarian, but it was also clean and orderly. In one corner were two simple cots with thin mattresses. In the center of the room stood a small wooden desk and a single chair. It felt like a monk's cell, a place of quiet purpose. On the desk, waiting for us, was a large olive-drab metal footlocker. My hands felt clumsy as I undid the latches. This was it, the answers. I lifted the heavy lid. The scent of old paper and ink filled the small room. The footlocker was filled with letters, dozens of them, bundled together with twine. They were all addressed to me in our grandfather's looping cursive. Beneath the letters was a small, shoebox-sized cassette recorder and a plastic case holding at least 20 microcassette tapes, each one neatly labeled with a date. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a time capsule. a message in a bottle sent across the years. I picked up the first bundle of letters. On top was a single unbundled envelope with my name on it. I sat down in the chair, my legs suddenly weak. Maya sat on one of the cots, watching me, her face a mixture of awe and apprehension. I opened the envelope. The letter was dated shortly after my 10th birthday, just before he passed away. "My dearest Alex," it began. "If you are reading this, then the world has failed you in a way I prayed it never would. I am so sorry. I am sorry for whatever has happened to bring you to this cold, dark place. I need you to know that this bunker is not a home. It is a lifeboat. It's the last resort I spent the last years of my life building, hoping with all my heart that it would decay into rust and ruin, undiscovered and unneeded." My vision blurred. I had to stop and take a breath. His voice on the page was so clear, so full of a sad, gentle love that it felt like a physical presence in the room. "I have seen the cracks forming in your family for a long time," the letter continued. "Your father, my son, is a good man at heart, but he is a weak one. He has fallen into debt, and he has fallen in with dangerous people. Your mother is trying to hold everything together, but I fear she is losing the fight. I tried to help, to intervene, but pride is a powerful and destructive thing. My offers were refused. I was pushed away. So I did the only thing I could think of. I decided to build a secret, a safety net so far removed from the family that no one could find it, no one could touch it, no one could sell it or gamble it away. This land, this box, this is all that's left of my legacy, and now it is yours." I put the letter down, my hand shaking. All the vague, confusing pieces of my childhood, the hushed arguments, my father's increasingly long absences, my mother's constant simmering anxiety, snapped into sharp, painful focus. My grandfather had seen it all coming. He hadn't abandoned us. He had been preparing for the storm. I picked up the small tape recorder. I found the tape labeled with the earliest date and inserted it. I pressed play. After a moment of static, a voice filled the concrete room. It was his voice. The generator ran out of my cranking power and the lights died, but I kept going, reading letter after letter by the beam of a flashlight, the small circle of light, a tiny island in the immense darkness. Each letter, each tape was another piece of the puzzle, another layer of the secret history of my family. He wrote about the lies he had to tell, the excuses he made for the money he was spending. He wrote about buying the supplies, bit by bit, from stores in different towns, so as not to arouse suspicion. He documented every step of the construction, every decision. The water filtration system, the ventilation shafts disguised as hollow logs on the surface. The careful cataloging of every can of food. It was the work of a man possessed by a singular, desperate purpose. He also wrote about his pain, his grief over his son's self-destruction, his frustration at being unable to stop it. "He is my son," he said on one of the tapes, his voice thick with emotion. "How can I not help him? But every dollar I give him is like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. It vanishes, and the men he owes, they are not forgiving." He never named them. He just called them the shadows. He wrote about my parents' final explosive fight, about my father leaving in the middle of the night, about my mother's breakdown. He knew it all. He had watched from a distance, helpless and heartbroken. A wave of anger, cold and pure, washed over me. It was so enormous it almost choked me. I was furious at my father for his weakness, for throwing his family away. I was furious at my mother for not being stronger, for letting him drag her down. I was furious at the whole world for its casual cruelty. And in a dark, irrational corner of my heart, I was furious at my grandfather. Why didn't you do more? Why did you hide? Why did you build us a tomb instead of fighting for us? I knew it was unfair. I knew he had done what he thought was best, what he thought was possible. But the grief and the anger were a toxic cocktail in my gut. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stood up, the letters falling from my lap. The bunker, which moments ago had felt like a miracle, a sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell. The concrete walls seemed to press in on me. The air was thick, unbreathable. I stumbled to the ladder and climbed, my movements clumsy and desperate. I pushed on the hatch. It was so heavy. For a panicked second, I thought I was trapped, that I wouldn't be able to lift it. I put my shoulder into it and shoved with all my might. It lifted with a groan, and I scrambled out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The forest was bathed in the pale, ethereal light of a full moon. The sky was a spray of impossibly bright stars. It was so beautiful it hurt. I staggered a few feet away from the hatch and fell to my knees, the damp earth cold through my jeans. And then I broke. The sobs came from a place deep inside me, a place I hadn't known existed. They were ragged, ugly sounds, torn from my throat. I cried for my lost parents. I cried for the sister sleeping in a concrete box, a sister whose childhood I had stolen. I cried for the grandfather I never really knew, a man who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. And I cried for myself, for the scared, stupid kid who had no idea what he was doing, who was in so far over his head he couldn't even see the surface anymore. I was 18 years old, and I was completely and utterly alone. I don't know how long I knelt there, shaking in the cold. Eventually, the storm inside me subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. I heard a sound behind me. Maya was standing at the top of the ladder, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face etched with concern in the moonlight. "Alex?" she said softly. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't offer any empty platitudes. She just came and sat on the ground next to me, close enough that our shoulders were touching. She leaned her head against mine. "We're together," she whispered, the same words she'd said in the shelter. "That's what matters." Her simple, unwavering faith in me was both a devastating burden and the only thing holding me together. In that moment, I knew I couldn't fall apart. I couldn't afford to. For her, I had to be strong. For her, I had to turn this tomb into a home. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the cold night air and stood up, pulling her to her feet with me. "Come on," I said, my voice hoarse. "Let's go inside. It's getting cold." We descended back into the earth, back into our strange inheritance, leaving the beautiful, indifferent moon behind. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The emotional storm of the night before had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear determination. Survival was no longer enough. We needed a plan. We needed a future. I went back to the footlocker. I had read most of the letters, listened to most of the tapes. But there was one last thing at the very bottom, something I had overlooked in my grief-stricken haze. It was a large, thick manila envelope, sealed with wax. The front simply said, "When all else is read." I broke the seal. Inside were 2 documents and another letter, this one written in a much shakier hand, dated only a few weeks before his death. The first document made my breath catch. It was a legal deed, the deed to the 10 acres of land we were currently on, registered not in his name, but in the name of a trust, the Hemlock Ridge Trust, and the sole beneficiary, to be granted full control upon his 18th birthday, was me, Alexander Cole. My grandfather hadn't just given me a place to hide, he had given me a piece of the world. It was legally, indisputably mine. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I owned this land, this forest, this secret. The second document was a set of instructions for a lawyer in a different state, a man I'd never heard of, outlining the trust's formation and the conditions of my inheritance. It was all airtight, legally sound. My grandfather had been meticulous. Then I read the final letter. "Alex," it began, "the land is only the beginning. It is the anchor, but an anchor is useless without a ship. I have left you one more thing. It was the last of my resources, the last of my secrets. I sold a small parcel of land my father left me, a piece no one in the family knew about. I converted it all to cash. It was a risk, but I could not put it in a bank. Banks have records. Banks have questions. Your father's creditors are like wolves. They can smell money from 100 miles away." My heart was pounding. "The money is buried on this property," the letter continued. "Go to the Crooked Pine. From there, face the sleeping giant. Walk 20 paces. You will find a flat gray stone that does not match the others. The money is beneath it, sealed in an army surplus ammunition can. It is not a fortune, but it is enough. Enough for a new start. But I must warn you, son, this gift comes with a choice. You can leave that can in the ground. You can live here, on this land, quietly and simply. You have enough supplies to last for years. You can be safe, hidden from the world. Or you can take the money and re-enter the world. You can build a life above ground. But the world has teeth. It will see that money, and it will want a piece of it. If you choose that path, you must be smarter than your father was. You must be smarter than I was. Use it to build, not to show off. Use it to become invisible, not a target. The choice is yours. Use it wisely. Make me proud." I put the letter down, my mind reeling. The choice he laid out was so clear, so stark. We could stay here, in the safety of the bunker, living off the grid, hiding from a world that had hurt us. It was tempting, so tempting. The thought of never having to deal with social workers or landlords or bosses again was a powerful lure. We could be safe here. But what kind of life would that be? A life in the shadows, always looking over our shoulders. A life underground. I looked at Maya. She was at the desk, her sketchbook open. She was drawing the shelves of canned goods, but she had added a small, whimsical touch. She'd given each can a little face. She was making this grim place her own, finding light in the darkness. She deserved more than this. She deserved sunlight and friends and a real school. She deserved a future, not just a protracted survival. The choice wasn't a choice at all. My grandfather had built a lifeboat. It was my job to use it to reach a shore, not to live on it forever. "Maya," I said, my voice firm, "we're going to build a house." She looked up from her drawing, a slow smile spreading across her face. "A real one?" she asked, her eyes shining. "With windows?" "Yeah," I said, a smile touching my own lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "With lots of windows." We weren't going to hide. We were going to build. We were going to take our grandfather's gift and turn it into a home. Finding the ammunition can was surprisingly easy. My grandfather's instructions were, as always, perfect. The flat gray stone was exactly where he said it would be. It took both of us to pry it up. Beneath it, buried 2 feet down in the soft earth, was the can. It was heavy. I wiped the dirt from the lid and unlatched it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of $100 bills, bundled in paper bands. I didn't count it. I didn't want to. Just seeing it was enough. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was hope, solidified. It was the foundation for our new life. I sealed the can, and we brought it back to the bunker, hiding it away. That money felt dangerous, powerful. It had to be handled carefully. The first step was to contact Ms. Albright. I found the burner phone my grandfather had left in the footlocker, still in its original packaging. It was an old, simple flip phone, but it was clean, untraceable. I took it a mile away from the bunker before I turned it on, my heart hammering in my chest. I was terrified she'd trace the call, that this would be the stupid mistake that got us caught. I dialed her number. "Alex? Oh my God, Alex, where are you? Is Maya with you? Are you two okay?" Her voice was a flood of frantic relief and worry. I took a deep breath. "We're okay, Ms. Albright. We're safe." I chose my words carefully, just as my grandfather had advised. "We're staying with a relative, a distant relative of my grandfather's. He passed away, but he left me some property." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Property?" she said, her voice laced with skepticism. "Alex, what are you talking about? We have to file a missing persons report for Maya. You could be in serious trouble." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "That's why I'm calling you. I need your help. I have the deed. It's all legal. The property is in a trust, and I'm the beneficiary. I'm 18 now. I want a petition for legal guardianship of Maya." Another long silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Alex," she said slowly, "this is highly unusual. A judge isn't just going to hand your sister over to you. You have no income, no home." "I have a home," I interrupted, a little too forcefully. "I have 10 acres of land and a roof over our heads. It's not much yet, but it's ours. Maya is safe here. She's happy. Please, Ms. Albright, don't report us. Just help us. Help me make this legal." I told her the county, but not the exact location. I told her about the trust, but not about the bunker or the cash. I gave her just enough of the truth. She was quiet for what felt like an eternity. "Okay, Alex," she finally said, and I almost collapsed with relief. "Okay. Don't call me again on this number. I'll get a new private line and text it to you. We'll talk through that. I'll look into the trust laws. But you have to promise me that Maya is safe." "I promise," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She's safer here than she's ever been." After the call, things started to move. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Ms. Albright was as good as her word. She became our fierce, pragmatic advocate, our bridge to the world we had left behind. She guided me through a maze of paperwork, of affidavits and petitions. I had to use some of the cash for legal fees, for filing costs. Each transaction was terrifying, a calculated risk. We planted a small garden, tomatoes, zucchini, lettuce, carrots. When the first green shoots pushed their way through the dark earth, Maya cheered. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was life. It was proof that things could grow here, that we could grow here. Months passed. The legal battle was grueling, but with Ms. Albright's help, we won. The judge, moved by the story of our grandfather's foresight and my determination, granted me legal guardianship of Maya. The day the official papers arrived at the Northwood post office, I held them in my hand and felt the last of the great weights lift off my shoulders. We were no longer fugitives. We were a family, legally, officially. A few weeks later, the first truckload of lumber arrived. The cabin was beginning. A year can change everything. The Alex who had stumbled out of that bus in Northwood, a scared kid with nothing but a cryptic map, was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone stronger, leaner, his hands calloused from work, his face weathered by the sun and wind. The self-doubt was still there, a quiet hum in the back of my mind. But it no longer drove me. It was just background noise. The forest, which had once been so intimidating, was now home. I knew its sounds, its rhythms. I knew which trees were best for firewood, where the wild blackberries grew thickest, which trails the deer used. The cabin stood where our garden had first been planted. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was ours. Every board, every nail felt like a victory. We had solar panels on the roof that fed a small battery bank, giving us quiet, consistent power. We had a real kitchen, a wood-burning stove that kept us warm through the long, cold winter. And best of all, we had windows. Big windows that looked out over the valley, that let the morning sun stream in. The bunker was still there, its hatch now hidden under a removable section of our cabin's porch. It was no longer our home, but our cellar, our pantry, our connection to the man who had made all of this possible. I thought about my grandfather every day. I finally understood him. I understood the impossible position he had been in, torn between his love for his son and his fear for his grandchildren. The bunker wasn't an act of surrender. It was an act of profound, desperate faith. Faith that I would be strong enough, that I would be smart enough, not just to survive, but to build. He hadn't given me an inheritance of money or land. He had given me an inheritance of responsibility. He had given me the chance to become the man my father never could be. He had given me the gift of purpose. My relationship with Maya had changed too. I was no longer just her protector. We were partners. She had thrived out here, away from the chaos and judgment of the world. Her art had blossomed. Her sketchbooks were filled with incredible drawings of the forest, of the cabin, of the life we were building. She was confident and funny. Her old fire returned, brighter than ever. We weren't just the broken pieces of a shattered family anymore. We were something new, something we had made ourselves. We were whole. One afternoon I was splitting wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a familiar comfort. Maya came out onto the porch. "Mail's here," she said, holding up a letter. It was from Ms. Albright. She had retired, but we still wrote to each other every few months. I opened it and read it, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was just a friendly update, a picture of her new grandson, a question about how our garden was doing this year. It was normal. It was a letter from a friend. I looked up from the page, at our small cabin, at the smoke curling from the chimney, at my sister smiling on the porch. I looked at the vast green expanse of the mountains stretching out before us, our mountains, and I felt a sense of peace so deep, so complete, it felt like coming home. We're sitting on the porch now, Maya and I, drinking hot chocolate from chipped ceramic mugs. Snow is falling, thick, silent flakes that are blanketing the forest in a layer of pristine white. It's quiet. A good kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think. The bunker is down there, beneath our feet, a secret sleeping under the snow. Its purpose is served. It was the lifeboat that carried us through the storm. But this cabin, this is the shore. For a long time I thought my story was about being abandoned. By my parents, by the system, by the world. I thought it was a story about loss. But I was wrong. It wasn't about being abandoned. It was about being found. My grandfather found me, across the gulf of time and death, with a map and a key. My sister and I found each other again, not as wards of the state, but as a family, in the dark of that concrete room. And out here, in the silence and the struggle, we found ourselves. Maybe you're watching this and you feel lost. Maybe you feel like you've been kicked out, written off, or left behind. Maybe you're waiting for a map that you don't think will ever come. I'm here to tell you to look closer. Sometimes the map isn't to a place. Sometimes it's a person who believes in you. Sometimes it's a hidden talent, a quiet strength inside you that you haven't discovered yet. That's your bunker. That's your lifeboat. It's that one thing you can hold on to when the storm hits, the thing you can build a future on. If this story means something to you, if you've ever had to build your own safety net from scratch, I'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We're trying to build a community here, a place for people who understand that home isn't always a place you're given, but something you have to fight for. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me, what was your bunker? What was the unexpected person or place or piece of yourself that saved you when you needed it most? I promise I'll be reading every single one, because every story of survival deserves to be heard. You're not alone in this. Maya leans over and shows me her sketchbook. She's drawn the two of us right here on the porch, with the snow falling all around. In the drawing, we're both smiling. I look at her and then back at the drawing, and I realize my own face is doing the same thing. It's a real smile, a genuine one. It feels good. It feels like the future.